We now take you to Trinidad and Tobago. Our second Caribbean Connections guest for today wears several hats: development specialist, social entrepreneur, human rights advocate, and activist. All these and more describe the person of Ms. Terry Ince. Good morning and welcome to Good Morning SKN.
Good morning, Terry.
Good morning to you both, and thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be a part of this conversation. Thank you so much.
It is our pleasure.
Our pleasure indeed.
All right, so we understand that you worked in the private and public sectors for about 26 years before shifting to nonprofit organizational work. Can you tell us about some of the positions that you held and what motivated you to make that shift?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking it, because I don't really get the opportunity to speak of my past work. I worked at a Fortune 500 company, a technology company, for, as you said, 26 years in several aspects of the company. So I was able to build upon my own individual development throughout the 26 years. I started as an account administrator, then became a systems engineer, and went on to being a client manager and project manager, where I managed different size companies along the way, including my last my last territory included NASA, the NASA facilities in Northern California, in Texas, and also some other organizations. Mobile Oil, for instance, was one of my companies at one point. So I've had a varied, diverse experience within the technology industry, and brought that to civil society. One of the things that I always appreciated while working in the corporate sector was the encouragement of employees to contribute to communities. And so I always had that opportunity, always took that opportunity, and was able to then develop skills that I believe are transferable into the civil society sector today.
Lovely. Congratulations once again on that. So you are the founder of the CEDAW Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. I would say CCOTT. What was the impetus for this committee?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
You were, or you are, not were, you are the founder of the CEDAW Committee of Trinidad and Tobago, CCOTT. What was the impetus for this committee?
So that's another very good question. So the impetus for CCOTT development really came out of a project I did in Trinidad, like a two and a half year project where I managed an initiative that was brought forth to a national initiative which focused on women's development. It was called in the political structure, in the political sector. So women's leadership in politics is what it was called. During that time, I had the opportunity to, I was asked actually at the end of that project to oversee and coordinate the response to the CEDAW review that the country was coming up for. As you may or may not know, I'm not sure how much you know about CEDAW, but CEDAW is the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and it is one of the most signed and ratified conventions by states. And as part of this, as a ratification, the states are now responsible for reporting every 4 years as to the improvements and developments in terms of addressing issues of women's issues. So how are women women and girls, how are they developing as it pertains to education, as it pertains to women in rural communities, as it pertains to sexual and reproductive health and rights. I mean, there are 16 substantive articles throughout as part of the convention that focuses on the development of women and girls. And so any state, any country that has ratified this convention is obligated now to report on the developments and the improvement that has been made over the time. So during this, in 2016, this Trinidad and Tobago was up for review, and I was invited to coordinate the response from a civil society perspective, while the state is responsible for submitting their report on their improvements. The civil society also they also have the opportunity to submit a report of their own, which oftentimes, sometimes it reflects what the state says, and oftentimes it expands on what the state has reported, and sometimes it highlights things that the state did not report. So that was my opportunity to work with other organizations, other civil society organizations, to create this report, to submit the report. And upon submission, I was then invited to participate in the lobbying of the CEDAW committee in Geneva. Coming out of that entire process, and even as I was doing my research and preparation for the report, it occurred to me that this action should not end with just a written report, that there should be something more sustainable that will follow this action going forward. And that was the borning, or the birth of the CEDAW committee as we know it. We began as a community, of practice, and then we were formally incorporated as a civil society organization, or a non-governmental organization, in 2018. And our responsibility, as we see it, is to hold all stakeholders accountable for the sustainable implementation of not only the mandates of the convention, but the recommendations that come out of the reviews. So when upon review, if some recommendations are made by the committee in Geneva to the state, we then work with all stakeholders, including the state and other civil society organizations and ourselves, to ensure that those recommendations are implemented in a sustainable way, but within the country context.
All right, and focusing on human rights, which I would like to do at this moment, remains somewhat of an anomaly for us, an issue for us here in the Caribbean. Unfortunately,
I'm having a little difficulty hearing you.
I will go again. All right. So the term human rights, is that better? The term human rights remains an anomaly and an issue for us in the Caribbean. We hear of it on special days only, it seems. How have you been able to advocate for human rights?
I only heard human rights at the end. Can you repeat the entire question again, please?
Okay. The term human rights remains an anomaly and an issue for us in the Caribbean.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we usually hear of human rights on special days. How have you been able to advocate for this?
That's a great question. And I think you're right in a sense that it remains an anomaly, but I think that is changing. And I think we have COVID-19 to thank for that, because during the pandemic, even though we're not past the pandemic, but during the height of the pandemic, we have had to recognize that there are ways in which we treat each other as human beings that we ought not to be doing, and that was really highlighted. So human rights is something that is fundamental to our work within CCOTT, and so we advocate for the human rights of all people. But what we say emphatically is that women's rights are human rights. And once that is understood, the rest should be more palatable. When we advocate for the right of a woman to have access to her health care, which and that she should have her own agency in determining what healthcare what aspects of healthcare she would want to use in sexual reproductive health. That is her right. That is her human right. It is not a gift that the government is giving to the woman. It is the right that she is demanding. And so our advocacy is always around the human rights of all people, but specifically women and girls.
Ms. Ince, we thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. It was truly our pleasure. And I'm certain this won't be our last conversation because we've barely scratched the surface with your work.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity. And again, it has been a bit of a struggle. I know that getting us together this morning, I think you might know, I literally just flew into Cambridge from Trinidad. I'm going to be a part of a panel discussion on Monday, specifically discussing the importance of developing women and girls in the area of STEM. And this is a forum that's being hosted by the Schlumberger Foundation. They are very focused on ensuring women and girls have that access to STEM and STEM STEM programs. I'm sorry, I'm blanking there for a second. STEM programs, so that they then could not only develop themselves as individuals, but take that learning back to their respective countries and increase the development in STEM and encourage young women and girls to view STEM disciplines as something that they would be interested in. And so it's seeing yourself in these places where others may not have seen you in the past. And that's the program that Schlumberger has been at the forefront of supporting since 2004, I believe. And so every year, I believe they have these forums where they bring all of their fellows together to kind of do a checkpoint, check in on how are they doing, to hear from past participants and to address current participants. And I have been very fortunate to be invited to be a part of a panel discussion on Monday, that addresses women and the importance of developing women, and actually in the context of the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which speaks to gender equality.